one really cool thing to do, which wine snobs do. And the byproduct of it is it telegraphs that you're an insider, is they'll take an empty glass and smell their empty glass. And why are they doing that, Natalie?
Oh, it's quiz time. Because, Mark, you told me they're looking
Yes,
for impurities, right?
exactly. They're
Like
looking
for
dishwasher.
detergent. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
That is so smart. I never knew to do that. I have been out there intimidating ever since you told me that earlier this week. It's
it,
like,
it will intimidate the restaurant because they'll be, they're going to have a really bad English accent suddenly. Hey, we've got a serious wine snob in the house. Treat this person very well. And especially these wine oriented restaurants, they will take notes on you. And when you reserve again at the restaurant, we've got that insider. Even if you're the butcher's third cousin, you're still in the business and they're going to treat you extra well. So sniff your empty glass and you will telegraph that you're in the business, even if you're not.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 60. In today's episode, I'm chatting with Mark Oldman, a New York-based best-selling author of several wine books, speaker, and entrepreneur. He is one of the liveliest and wittiest guests I've ever had on the show. You're going to love him. Now, this conversation first aired on my regular Facebook Live video show that you can catch every second Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. I'll put a link to that in the show notes where you can find us, join us, drink with us at nataliemclean.com/60. I'll also post links to Mark's website, his books, and social media handles. During the Facebook chat, another wine writer, Douglas Trapasso, asks a question about how to drink like a billionaire if you're not one already. A billionaire, that is, not a drinker. I love that question because it sparked a great discussion and some juicy tips from Mark on buying wines without a billionaire's budget, but with a billionaire's taste. As well, Mark talks about one bottle of wine for which he went to criminal court. It's a great story. And if you want to see that bottle, it's also in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/60. Now back to you. Why not make 2020 the year that you move from feeling overwhelmed with all the wines on that restaurant wine list to feeling confident about every wine you pick when you go and dine out, whether you're with a group of friends or it's just you on your own or you with a partner? I can help you with that. Sign up for my free online video wine class called The 5 Wine and Food Pairing Mistakes That Can Ruin Your Dinner and How to Fix Them Forever. Go to nataliemclean.com/class and choose a time and a date that work for you. I look forward to seeing you in that class. All right, now on with the show.
Mark is a really fascinating guy. He graduated from Stanford Law School. He founded the wine club there. Then he did a pivot, so to speak, and he has been described by the New York Times as the wine world's greatest showman. He has a lot to offer. He's going to share really good tips tonight, like how to cultivate a wine spouse, what's the one overriding factor of great wine, and why restaurant lists are the Bermuda Triangle. And he joins me from New York City. Welcome, Mark Oldman.
Thanks so much, Natalie. Great to be here and there too.
Yeah, that's right. You're everywhere. So no, we're so glad you could join us because I have been going through your book, How to Drink Like a Billionaire. I just love all these smart, savvy, snappy chapters. I'm going to ask you to start with That tip that you gave us before when we were just doing our little teaser video, just for those who missed that, tell us about kind of a tip on choosing wine in a restaurant that people may not think about when they get there.
Right. I think the tip I gave you was if you don't even want to bother, ask the waiter what he or she drinks or what the chef drinks when he or she is off duty. This is usually something pretty interesting and it's usually something not that expensive. And you don't have to know anything about wine then. So a lot of people are like that. Appreciate that.
Absolutely terrific. Mark, tell us what your earlier books were. There were two, weren't there?
Yeah, the first one was Oldman's Guide to Outsmarting Wine.
Excellent.
My publisher almost cut that word outsmarting out of there, but luckily it was saved. You know how it goes with these publishers, Natalie. You're out of control as the author sometimes. And then the other one was Oldman's Brave New World of Wine, which explored some of the wine beyond the usual suspects of wine, some little bit out of people's comfort zone.
And back to that restaurant scene again, there was something about glassware as well, a really savvy tip that you shared, another one about glassware in a restaurant.
It's amazing how in restaurants, certain people get extra good treatment and certain people don't. I tend to not get very good treatment because no one knows I've written books on wine and I look relatively uninformed. And so I'm usually in that bad camp, which means I have great empathy for my mom and my sister and most of my friends who aren't recognizable to the restaurant. And one really cool thing to do, which wine snobs do, and the byproduct of it is it telegraphs that you're an insider, is what wine snobs do is they'll take an empty glass and smell their empty glass. And why are they doing that, Natalie?
Oh, it's quiz time. Because, Mark, you told me they're looking for impurities, right?
Exactly. They're looking
for detergent. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
That is so smart. I never knew to do that. I have been out there intimidating ever since you told me that earlier this week.
It will intimidate the restaurant because they'll be, like we've got a serious, they're going to have a really bad English accent suddenly. Oh, we've got a serious wine snob in the house. Treat this person very well. And especially where I am in New York, especially these wine-oriented restaurants or the restaurants that are trying to increase their service, improve their service, they will take notes on you. And when you reserve again at the restaurant, we've got that insider. Even if you're the butcher's third cousin, you're still in the business and they're going to treat you extra well. So sniff your empty glass and you will telegraph that you're in the business, even if you're not.
Wow, a hint of Cascade with I don't know. But you're right. There is also a practical side apart from intimidation and so on, which I know you always take that humorous side. As we know, detergent can kill the bubbles on champagne, but it also just can ruin the taste or at least cover up the taste of wine. And you were saying also, I think, if people are storing their glasses on like a wooden shelf, it can get that kind of smell too. So it's a really good tip, Mark.
Cabinety smell. Yes. Yeah. Well, I BYO to a really great Italian restaurant, very simple restaurant here in New York called Villa Mosconi. And I've been going there with my family, especially my mom and my sister, since I got my braces tightened in the 80s. I mean, it's same cheesy oil paintings on the wall, same amazing food. But I mentioned this to my mom, and my mom knows nothing about wine, but she's like, those glasses they give us really do smell detergent-y. That's one of the biggest killers of wine outside of port taint. So it really is an important thing to look for.
Okay, so if it's not a good glass and there's detergent, I mean, do you keep sending back glasses or do you just, if you're in that kind of establishment, they're not treating how many times can you send back a bad glass?
Right. Well, Villa Mosconi, back to Villa Mosconi, we will now, if we smell the detergent, we'll just, the glass smells a little bit funny, not to be imperious about it. It's almost like sending back a wine that is suffering from court taint. What I do sometimes with that, and that's a delicate thing, especially for me, and I imagine for you too, because my non-wine pro friends, if they see I have a problem with it, I think they secretly go, okay, is he going to be a bit douchey about this? Let's see how he handles it. So it's how I handle wine with Courtain. I give them ownership over it. I say, this glass smells a little bit funny. You check it out, and sometimes they won't even smell. They'll whisk it away.
Sure.
Or if it's suffering from Courtain, it has that mildewy, moldy smell. I'll say, I think this might be off a little bit. Would you mind smelling the wine or having the sommelier or the bartender smell the wine?
Right.
And that way you're not like Emperor Nero, down, take it away. It's not like that. You're more collaborative. You're showing that you come in peace, that you're not there to make their life horrible, but you do want to correct the situation.
Absolutely.
So there's a diplomacy to it.
It's a great approach, Mark. And that is what I use as well. Because I am fairly confident of wine faults now, but sometimes I'm wondering, is this just a style I don't like? So I will do that. I'll say, is it just me, or is there something a bit off with this wine? What do you think? Hand it over and see what they say.
It's so true. And sometimes the Courtain is not fully there, but
Right.
it's a little bit, it's like a spectrum.
Yeah, it's just dampening a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, people expect wine pros to immediately know, but I think it's stress relieving for casual drinkers to know that even we don't know for sure sometimes. You got to get a second or third opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great tip. And we're going to get lots more tips. Douglas Trapasso, who has read How to Drink Like a Billionaire, says he's not a billionaire yet, Mark. So what's up with that?
Me neither.
Okay. At least you're not losing all the money on wine.
Exactly. And I'll say billionaires, and I do know a few. I'm fortunate to know a few, because when you go to Stanford, the bad side of the tracks, we end up writing about wine. The smart ones end up starting .coms and do become billionaires. But, the way they stay billionaires, they don't want to overspend on wine. So especially for daily drinking, a lot of them, are looking for that great $15 bottle, that great $10, $20 bottle. So it's something that we all, Natalie, I'm sure you're the same way. And I know with all your great reviews, a lot of the wines hover around the 10 and 15 and $20 mark. And that's our golden chalice for the wine pro.
Absolutely. And I think it's that chase that's exciting. It's like, I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. It's like finding a Versace jacket at a warehouse, an outlet store for 10% of the original cost. It's the hunt, the thrill of the capture, something underpriced.
Yeah. It sends a lot of dopamine to the right center in the, it really makes us excited. And it's fun teaching people what to look for and so forth. And some of the wines I know you'll be drinking, there are places to look for those really good values.
Absolutely. Nice segue, Mark.
Thank you.
One of the wines, you gave me sort of general parameters, but you suggested I look for an Assyrtiko from Greece, which is a crisp white wine. But tell me why you chose this wine as one of the perhaps underpriced gems in the liquor store.
Well, I guess one very good rule of thumb is, and it doesn't always hold true, like everything in wine, there are always exceptions to the rule, but the harder to pronounce, often the better value it is, because people are afraid, including me sometimes, if I don't know exactly how to pronounce it, people are afraid of that performance anxiety at the wine list. So, Assyrtiko, that's a mouthful. It's like that Greek red, ayortitiko. Unless you go out of your way and write it out phonetically, chances are, and I'm corrected in these New York restaurants all the time. So what happens is these wines are less in demand because they're less ordered. You're not going to pay a familiarity premium for them. And they tend to be less marked up. You kind of have to know about it to have the confidence to order it, because in these restaurants, who wants to spend 30 or 40 or 50 or more on a wine that might not pan out because you weren't familiar with it? So you almost have to have someone tell you, well, Assyrtiko, it's a white wine from Greece, from Santorini, I believe.
Yes.
It's just a great value. The Greeks have really figured out excellent priced white wine, and it goes so well with their famous seafood too.
Absolutely. This is beautiful. It's just got that light floral note, but lots of racy acidity for the seafood and everything else. Great choice, Mark. So going back to our glassware discussion, paper cups are out for wine?
I never say anything's out. And if you really want to drink like a billionaire, I have seen true billionaires or metaphorical billionaires. A metaphorical billionaire is like, I know you, Natalie, you had Randall Graham on.
Oh, yeah.
I'd say top winemakers are like metaphorical billionaires. They don't have to get too formal about wine because they've seen it all, they've done it all, they're not intimidated. So I've seen people like that or actual billionaires drink out of paper cups. I mean, whatever it takes in the moment. If you don't have beautiful glassware, I mean, obviously we want nice glassware, thin glass, doesn't have to be expensive. But paper cups, I am not too big for paper cups. I'll take them if I have to.
That's right. You'll improvise.
No doubt.
But back to the restaurant setting and finding good values. Why do you call a restaurant wine list a Bermuda Triangle? I was intrigued by that description.
Well, there are very good wine-oriented restaurants out there. And then there are restaurants that somewhat take advantage of the diners, and they know our inclinations. They know that we kind of fall back on the same standards. For example, and I'm guilty of this myself, that when I look at a wine list, where do my eyes fall? It goes to the least expensive wine, and then I'm afraid of looking like a skinflint. So then it will come up to the second or third place on the list. And I mean, very good restaurateurs will put excellent wine in that position, but restaurateurs who want to move a wine or want to mark up a wine more will sometimes put it in that second or third seat. And you have to be on guard for that because, that might not be the best choice or it might not be the best value. Think about what the wine list is. It's basically just a sales list with foreign names on it. I'm sure you're like this, Natalie, too. When you go to restaurants with people, you get the wine list because everyone's like, you're the expert. But honestly, especially if it's like an all Italian list, a lot of those wines I haven't had before, or at least in those specific vintage years, I haven't had those wines before. And it's really the restaurant that knows which wines are producing the oohs and the ahs. So it's up to them to communicate or have a sommelier or a waiter who really knows their stuff.
Absolutely.
One great example is I was just at the Nomad Hotel. I'm having a special dinner. It's kind of a pricey, cool, hip downtown hotel here in New York. And every wine almost, I opened it up and it was a Malax moment immediately because almost every wine was over $100. And I'm like, oh no. And then I looked at the least expensive wines and I saw some Beaujolais. So some wine from Morgon, which, is one of the villages of Beaujolais. And I saw two priced at $65, which for this very expensive restaurant was actually really good and almost suspiciously less expensive than the other wines. But because I knew the list had integrity, I knew the restaurant was famous for a good list, I knew it was safe to order the least expensive wine. And I knew I wouldn't be perceived as a piker or a skinflint because I knew it was probably really good. And that's when I took over and I asked the sommelier came over. I'm like, I'm thinking of these two Beaujolais and they were both around the same price. Which would you prefer? So sometimes choosing from the wine list, it's your instincts, but then you rely on their expertise also, if they seem credible.
Sure. I like that, sort of narrowing it down and then handing the final decision to them because they've, as you said, they probably know their list better. They've tasted those wines. They know the vintages. That's a good tip too. Absolutely. Yeah. So you write about wine, but what got you interested in it? Can you remember the moment that you decided to write about wine or take us back to your first, best wine, whichever way you want to tackle this?
Well, yeah, I'll go with the former, which was in college. I did the overseas program in England.
Okay.
And Oxford has a snooty, or at least it was then, team called the Oxford Wine Tasting Team. They actually play Cambridge in a Super Bowl of dorky blind tasting.
Like the rowing competition. But...
Exactly. Right. It's like half blue, so half varsity. I was the ugly American over there and I knew nothing about wine. In fact, I grew up loving Moosehead beer from Canada.
All right.
One of the reasons why I got into wine and I never like abused it is because when I was 16, my very cool mom was like, you pick the beer that will get delivered for the house. And instead of like picking something really upscale, I picked what I found delicious, which was Moosehead. And to this day, my mom still likes Moosehead because I developed that brand loyalty with her early. So anyway, I grew up in New Jersey drinking Moosehead beer. And so I'm doing the overseas program in Oxford. And so this is competitive and it was run by an American. And there's no more snooty Brit than an American who wants to be a Brit. So like this was the wrong climate, but I got back to California and I'm like, I want to start a wine club in California, but it won't be competitive. We'll be at Stanford and we'll pay winemakers, people like Randall Graham, top winemakers to come in. And I just was fascinated by wine. I thought, we're pretty close to Napa and Sonoma and Santa Barbara. We'll get the winemakers and we'll pay for them to come in. And I took dues originally from the group of students. And what I didn't realize is they were chomping at the bit, to market to college students. So we had Robert Mondavi himself. We had Bruce Cakebread. We had Doneen Dyer, who then was the winemaker with Domaine Chandon. We had Jim Clendenin come up from Au Bon Climat. And it was like each one, they were like, so how many bottles of our $90 mountain grown Cabernet do you want me to bring?
Wow.
And I was like, uh-oh. So the dues I collected actually I made special wine glasses for everyone. We learned so much. I mean, you can imagine having these people come in when you're still an undergrad, or there were some grad students in there too. So that kind of set me on my way learning about wine.
That's excellent. Way better than being the yearbook editor.
Yeah, exactly.
Good choice.
Better than the Latin club.
That's true. So tell us, you've got another tip in there that really intrigued me. How to cultivate a wine spouse. Oh, do take a moment to have a sip there. Yeah. I've kept you talking nonstop.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I have my own red wine here,
Okay.
some Washington State.
Oh, Washington. Well, let's just take a moment for there because I see your Washington and I raised you this one. Which Washington one are you drinking?
I'm drinking Seven Hills.
Okay.
And it's a Cabernet blend.
That's what mine is too, a Cabernet Syrah blend.
And they do it so well. It's slightly cooler up there. And you have sometimes smaller wineries and they really care. They really put the love into their beautiful red blends. So I tell people Syrah or Cabernet or Merlot from Washington State is one of the great sources, especially for sometimes underpriced red wine.
Absolutely. So it's a great point, Mark, because, you can get, of course, Napa, Cabernet, and Syrah, but from Washington, you're getting that badge name of a grape, but from a region that is not yet overpriced.
Exactly. They're still coming up. They're like Avis. I feel like often they try harder for less money, which is, again, what we're looking for and what we're trying to transmit to people. I think I was supposed to answer a question, though.
Yes. Okay, so wait a minute. Oh, how to cultivate a wine spouse. Sorry, I jumped right into as soon as you said Washington.
No, I'm distracted by the deliciousness of this. And this is actually a day old. I had to open this yesterday and I'm just, hanging around the house here drinking. But so a wine spouse. I was inspired by the idea of like workplace romance and how people at work tend to have these platonic workplace spouses, my work husband or work wife. And similarly, you can develop that sort of relationship with certain wine stores that appear to be on their game and have the love. So I tell people, the people seem knowledgeable and they seem honest. They're not trying to upsell you. Develop a relationship with the people working at these wine stores because often they're all puffed up with this great information. Mm-hmm. And people are intimidated who come in about talking about what their needs and desires are in terms of wine. So feel free to. And if they care and they're easy to talk to, I might say, like with this Washington State, if I like this style, I'm looking for a rich red that is velvety and not over $20. And what's great about these wine stores, the wine merchants that really have the love, they will remember that, and they'll even email you and they'll text you. Or if you're going to wine country, they'll sometimes will even, set up appointments for you. So that ongoing platonic long distance, well, not long distance relationship, but long range relationship can actually be a wonderful thing. And it's how a lot of like intermediate wine experts buy their wine. These wine stores are looking to build that relationship because they know the lifetime value of your patronage is really, really valuable to them, rather than a wham bam, thank you, ma'am. You go into the wine store and you never come back.
Right.
So that's sort of, and in wine stores where it's a little bit more expensive, and I know it's a little different in Canada, but in America where it's a little more expensive, sometimes you're paying for their expertise, or you're paying for the fact that they're able to get in some really cool wines you wouldn't find elsewhere.
Absolutely. And it reminds me of that old saying, you can give someone a haircut multiple times, but you can only scalp them once. So, that idea of returning, but it also reminds me of the way we cultivate a relationship with a hairdresser or hairstylist. Yeah. I mean, most of us don't go to a different hairstylist every time. You might over time switch, but they get to know you and your hair texture and what you want. And so I think it makes total sense to cultivate that relationship with somebody, a staffer who really knows wines in the liquor store, who gets to know you and your taste and your budget. And
totally.
Yeah.
You just reminded me of, Natalie, two things. One is I hope my hair cutter's not watching, because I've tried to diversify beyond him. And I feel like, I've escaped. He's not a serial killer, but like you always hear
Sweetie
about like,
Todd.
yeah, exactly. Or someone's gotten to the lawn, like they've gotten out of the house, they've gotten the lawn, but they get pulled back in.
Yeah.
So I haven't been quite able to diversify, which is always good. But I remember in the early 90s in New York, I went to some random haircutting place. The guy really wanted to tell me jokes. And he wasn't using the clippers. He was just like doing, I'm like, you're not going to give me a crew cut, right? And he's like, no, it's fine. I actually had longer hair, looked terrible, but he's in the middle of telling me a joke. And he basically gave me a crew cut, but the hair was going long this way. And I go, do you know what you just did? And he goes, free haircut. I'm
free. That's great.
But like that didn't really make up for the fact I looked like, the woman from Bow Wow Wow, if you remember the I Want Candy video. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there must be a wine equivalent to that. Trying to lasso it back to wine. Someone who gives you that bad Beaujolais, or actually you suggested a Gamay from Canada, segueing right along here. A Gamay, that was a real insider tip, and kudos to you being in New York City and recognizing that Canada rocks, especially Niagara, cool climate Gamay. Tell us why.
It's just, there are a lot of small wineries, and I know that Niagara, it's a specialty there. A lot of people will say, or the really knowledgeable will say, it's the best Gamay outside of the actual Beaujolais region of France. Beaujolais, it's a red that is light to medium bodied and very floral and very easy to drink, very low tannins, not a lot of tannic bitterness. And I was up there doing the Toronto Food and Wine Festival, and I had a number of great local Gamay. A lot of it doesn't get down to America, but I was so impressed with the quality. And, a lot of these were small wineries I hadn't heard of before. And Gamay, I call it like a pivot wine. It pivots between the world of food we'd associate with white wines and food we associate with red wine. So it's kind of in the middle of the spectrum. So it goes with everything and often has juicy acidity. Tell me about your Gamay there.
All right. Well, I'm loving it because it's plush and round. And the difference I find with this Niagara Gamay is it's not to be mistaken for Beaujolais Nouveau Gamay. Of course, Beaujolais makes Gamays that are longer lived as well, aside from the Nouveau style. But this one is just so juicy, so like satin pillow, plush. I want grilled chicken or planked salmon or something, but it's savory too. It's medium bodied. It doesn't knock you over the head. It's got low alcohol. It's about 12%. To me, it's a hedonist dream. So
it's really beautiful. And you're drinking local, which is so great.
That's true.
let me just say, I've been to Canada maybe, I don't know, 10 to 12 times in my life, but
Yeah.
I have deputized myself an unofficial Canadian because I feel like Canadians, obviously, they're well known for being polite. They have great senses of humor, like you. And who else? I'm going to give Dan Aykroyd, who I think I saw some of your show where you mentioned that he has a winery. And
He does.
I interviewed him once, and he was the sweetest, coolest, funniest guy. And Canadians don't take themselves too seriously. And I love that because, like you can be a total expert, but not lord it over others. And that's like the perfect combination of things, I think.
Thank you, Mark. You've got that in spades. So, Mark, what is your opinion on Kermit Lynch and or garagiste wine? Two different questions there.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic. Kermit Lynch. One of the amazing things is sometimes I'll order a wine in a restaurant that I won't know that much about, but I'll take a chance on it. And then I'll turn the bottle around and I'll see Kermit Lynch on the back. I've also read his book, Adventures on the Wine Trail, and some other ones too. So this guy really has the love and really chooses well.
Absolutely. And for folks who aren't as familiar, he's an importer based in Berkeley, California. Very famous. I think he's inspired a lot of wine writers just because he was one of the first to really dig down literally and figuratively into the earth, visit the wines on the back roads and the lesser known labels, and then bring them back. And as you say, in America especially, when his name is on the bottle as the importer, you can always trust that wine, that he has vetted it personally himself.
Yeah, he's got a lot wrapped up in it. He's not just making a buck. And that's really differentiates the great importers from the not so great ones. But that back label, sometimes the back label tells you more information than the front label because the back label tells you who imported it. And they're almost like, think of like a persnickety parent who's like, there used to be a commercial like for Fruit of the Loom. It showed this like persnickety older mom type. And it was like inspected by number 26. And it was like, if it passes her, it's good quality. And these great importers are like that sort of filter. So just they're putting their name on it, chances are it's going to be very high quality.
Absolutely. It's like curation, well-respected museum, like a collection, really.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Well, good analogy.
Ready to drink. Preta drink it. No, wait a minute.
Prêt to drink a.
I love, back to your book, actually, they have all these snappy little titles and snackable size and that's not to...
Snackable, yes.
Yeah,
No.
Not to minimize the intelligence here. It's just so eminently readable. Tell me about why oak can be deliciously slutty.
See, now that I think slipped through. I think in these days of publishing, they don't edit as much as they used to. And I think that the word slutty, which I'm glad in this like world of political correctness, people haven't taken that the wrong way. But I meant that in that sometimes, people aren't that into Chardonnay and other very oaky wines because they see a lot of oak in the fermentation or in the aging. But it's kind of like, listen, I cut my teeth on California wine. Like, I love an earthy Beaujolais or let's say a red Burgundy, and I love high acid wines. But, there are times I love very oaky wines. I mean, and to California's defense, a lot of winemakers have pulled back on the oak. I just had a great Chardonnay from... let me think what the producer, it was a Beringer Chardonnay. And it was only a touch of oak. And they used to, in the 90s, make Chardonnay much, much more oaky. But even when it's oaky, I like it sometimes. And when it's high alcohol and oaky, like it's slutty in a like kind of hot way. Like now you wouldn't lionize it. You wouldn't like hold it out as the supreme example. But, the people who say wine should just be one specific way are kind of killjoys. Back to your analogy about art, it's like I would never in a million years tell people what kind of art they want to enjoy. And sometimes I like really high-minded art, and sometimes I like down and dirty, near obscene art.
Absolutely.
And no expert should I mean, maybe they have their reputations to develop, but it's a very personal thing, matters of taste and subjective, and depends on, what your mood is and what you ate that day in terms of wine. And it's fine to like many different styles of wine.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me also of beach reading. Like, you can have the thrillers or the
Completely.
Oedipus Rex or whatever.
Yeah, the Real Housewives equivalent of wine sometimes,
Absolutely.
pure pleasure down and dirty. Now, there are wines that are made terribly and that don't taste very good, but I'm talking about the ones that are actually made well, but in a style that maybe the cool kids aren't liking as much right now.
That's true. That's true. Should you be requesting glassware, Mark?
If they have it, at my beloved Villa Moscone, they either have like the little thimble size ones they use for their own wine, or because I've shared my wine with them. And that's a great thing to do when you share your wine, because that's probably the quickest way to become a regular without having to spend a lot of money. Just share your wine. But they only have one other type of glass, and it's a large, bold glass. I don't get too precise when it comes to, exact shape of glasses. I know some people swear by it. I like my glasses to be thin so you're not drinking glass. And I like it to be inexpensive because I break glasses all the time. And I like it to be at least 20 ounces. So I only have to fill it up halfway and I'm not splashing out of the glass.
You don't need the goblets where you can get a facial out of them.
right. Yeah. Those are a little clumsy. Although a chalice, maybe for dramatic effect.
That's true.
Chalice.
There's always the pageantry element.
There's always the pageantry.
You're very good at, I hear. I've read all kinds of reviews. I would love to see you speak in person, but you've been at Aspen, some of the top wine and food shows, and your reviews are amazing. What is it about speaking that you enjoy?
Thank you for saying so. And really, I feel like when I've read your books and I've seen your videos, you have the same impulse in that if someone's going to give you their attention, you really have to make it worth their while. And I'm a tough audience when it comes to, we live in an ADD world where it's TV and videos and Instagram. And so if someone's actually taking time to give you their attention, you better not just have the best information. You better make it fun. Why I find my style, why I think it might be effective is because A, I don't take myself too seriously. And B, I spend a lot of time thinking about the best teaching methods for people. In other words, things that can be communicated in a sentence. Yeah. I try to do it and not spend 8 pages because I know people are busy. And, I went to law school. As you said, I never practiced. I saw too many of my friends unhappy and leaving the law like 5 or 10 years later. So I just never practice, although I did teach wine at law school, which was a lot of fun. But a lot of the professors in law school, a lot of the subjects weren't that hard, but they would dress it up in complication and they would do what's called hiding the ball. And I remember the most fun class or potentially fun class was criminal law. And we had this professor who spoke in paragraphs. He was too smart for his own good. And you never learned any criminal law. You learned like what intent meant and all these like philosophical things that only the most intellectual person even cared about. And it sucked all the fun out of what should have been a very fun thing to study, criminal law. Yeah. It wasn't anything like what you see on TV or reality shows, or they took all the color out of it. Yeah. So with wine, there's a tendency for people to lose the forest through the trees, for people to get so into the micro detail that you forget what other people really want to learn and that they also want to be entertained. Yeah. They want cool analogies. Yeah. Your last book, I marveled when I was reading it. I was just the title, Red Wine and Drunk All Over. Fantastic title, but most wine people wouldn't have the confidence to name a book that way. Yet the people, casual drinkers, love that. So it's a real balance. You don't want to be too frivolous. I remember 15 years ago, there were like wine reviews, they'd say, oh, it's like, Sophia Loren on a beach with a sunset. And what does that mean? So you really want to use transparent language, but to be fun and to be colorful, that just helps people learn better.
Absolutely. That is, amen. That's the perfect calibration between not being too obscure and just talking to yourself and simplifying. Like I'm already remembering your chapters, like restaurant list, the Bermuda Triangle. I'll remember 2, 3 up. Just this wine spouse. People will remember that. Go into a wine store, long-term relationship, continuity of care, knowing it. Like it's just
Exactly.
It's memorable. It's how we learn too. Like especially, you went through law school, so you would condense down or develop acronyms or whatever. One of the ones that I remember, I think it was from a pairing book, was if you squeeze a lemon on it, go with a high acid wine. If you would slather butter, then go with your buttery Chardonnay or whatever. Like just
I
those
love it.
little things. Yeah. No,
And related to what you just said, and wine professionals, wine writers have come up with really good analogies. And another one that I just thought of yesterday was if you like espresso, if you like beverages with some bitterness, maybe you'll like more tannic wines or wines with a little bit more bitterness. And I was eating, do you ever had Vegemite from Australia?
no, I've avoided it all my life, but go ahead.
Most people have. I actually like it.
Okay.
But it took a while to like it.
Is it bitter?
It's bitter. And it tastes like it's supposed to be good for you. So that's another problem there is with it. But it's that bitterness. I was like, I was talking to a friend of mine who's Australian. I'm like, the Vegemite people, if they want to move beyond Australians, they should market themselves as like, if you like espresso, try Vegemite. Or if you like a bitter Barolo, maybe you'll like Vegemite because it's the same subway line in terms of bitterness. It's the same kind of taste bud spectrum. But the Aussies probably don't need to market their Vegemite. But it made me think of like, if you like whole milk, that's the creamy, non-bitter, the buttery Chardonnay. But if you can tolerate a really tight Sancerre with a lot of acidity, maybe you'd also like espresso. Maybe you also like Italian reds, so there's certain similarities across the metaphorical lemon squeeze you're talking about.
Sure, absolutely. And it's bringing to mind things that Tim Hanai says in California about, our taste receptors and that sort of thing, but also just
Totally.
Amazon's basic algorithm. If you like this, maybe you'll like that. I mean, people are just looking for that.
They really are. And I'm looking for it in every realm, in music, in art, in TV shows. It's really useful. Pandora, oh, yeah. And it doesn't always work. Like I'll use Pandora and I'll say, if you create a radio station for X, you'll like Y. Sometimes there are huge misfires on it, but sometimes it's quite brilliant. So it's more to expand it's such an open season now on all types of media and on all wines now. It's such a brave new world of wine out there.
It is, well said. And it's just a jumping off point. So I'm going to go back. Have you found some of more obscure wines that you've written about in your earlier books have become more mainstream? So the books that you first highlighted, are they more mainstream now?
Amazing point. It's so true because I'm almost afraid. I want to tell my first publisher, can I revise some of this? Because is your second wine, what a segue, Torrontés?
Oh, Torrontés, yes, absolutely. Yeah. I've got from Catena Alamos is their label. Torrontés, nice and floral, beautiful.
Exactly.
Wine. From Argentina.
Right. And it's a white wine that has become more well-known. It's still not prime time yet. It's not ready for prime time versus prime time. But I wrote about that a bit in the first book. And yeah, it smells floral, but it tastes totally dry. Also from Argentina, when I wrote the first book, Malbec was almost prime time, but it wasn't quite prime time, the big, rich, luscious wine from Argentina. Yeah. But Malbec now, it really isn't news to most people. How I tell is like my mom and my non-wine geeky friends, which are most of my friends, they know to order Malbec. And so, it's kind of hit prime time. And I think generally speaking, compared to my first wine book came out, I think it was 2004, people in general have just become much more sophisticated by wine, thanks to people like Natalie and, just expanding people's palate. And I think especially you're finding the millennials and Generation X and so forth become more adventurous when it comes. And you see it in restaurants. You see it how wine lists are divided. And you see, more of these wine regions. I mean, even the Canary Islands has some pretty good wine out there. The level has risen. The level of knowledge has risen among everybody. So, to tell, hey, I've got this great wine called Malbec, it's not really a surprise anymore. You have to put your finger and know which way the wind is blowing, so to speak, and kind of get a sense for what is beyond the comfort zone and what's actually in the center of the comfort zone now.
Absolutely. And the 4 wines that you recommended all fit that category. Undiscovered or underpriced gems,
Right.
I think. They're really smart choices, Mark. Are you a super taster? Do you know, Mark? Have you been measured?
Not.
Oh,
I'm
you're
not.
Okay.
I'm not. And by the way, Tim Hanai is a great guy. And when I ran the Stanford Wine Circle in 89 and 90 and 91, I started it then and it lives on at the business school. But he was one of the speakers who came in.
Yeah.
And his style of being informal, but eminently knowledgeable and doing food and wine pairing demonstrations with lemon and sugar and sweet wine and dry wine was absolutely brilliant. But in terms of super tasters, I think most people are good enough tasters, and I feel like I'm a good enough taster. But I don't lay claim to, David Lee Roth, I mentioned in my book, now I'm taking a little left turn, but it's fun. When he was fronting Van Halen the first time around, he said he got paternity insurance in case he, let's just say, spread his wealth around too much and someone got pregnant. And he probably didn't need it, but it created the mythology that if he needs paternity insurance, he must be pretty prolific in the romance department. And I think similarly, there's certain wine experts out there who, they're like, I'm a super taster. And you can't verify that. So I think it does create kind of the mythology. And there are super tasters out there, don't get me wrong, people with incredible taste buds and skills and so forth. I think most people kind of vary somewhere between pretty good and, not terrible. And I find myself in that range. Now, what I think I do have some aptitude at is communicating.
Oh, yes.
You
have a super communicator for sure.
Working at it and trying to, the pedagogical side, trying to figure out what's going to put the light bulb over people's heads. But in terms of like blind tasting, it's a great parlor game. And I think I'm pretty good at it, but I don't think I'm better than most people at it. So.
I think that is just such an intimidation factor. Like the blind, unless you're all in it for the jovial kind of setting, blind tasting is one of the worst things that can happen, I think, to wine. It's just a personal opinion. I just think it's like, watch while I ferret out. Oh, the farmer's daughter was 17.
Well, and let me tell you, one of my wine mentors is one of the greatest collectors of wine. He's the intersection of his great capacity in terms of money, but he also has great generosity. And he likes sharing his wine with a lot of people. And that Venn diagram overlap is hard to find. You wouldn't know. I mean, he's not like a famous gentleman, but he's incredible. And one thing he shared with me last week, I was out in California. He's in his 80s and been there, done that. And he was actually one of the original venture capitalists. So before venture capitalists even had a name. And he was really smart, not a blowhard at all. Not like, in New York, sometimes you find these like big collector types, and it's kind of like a competition. He is so low key and cool, but he actually ended up buying some counterfeit wine. If any of you out there know about Rudy Kerwanian, I forgot how to pronounce his name, but the wine collector. Yeah. Great documentary on Netflix about him right now called Sour Grapes. He's in prison for 10 years. Apparently, he did $500 million worth of damage to the fine wine business for auction grade wines. And my friend had purchased, and by the way, a lot of people who buy fake stuff and who get snookered would never admit it. But this guy is so confident and yet so low key and such a generous spirit. that he not only totally admitted it, but last week we actually opened some of these Rudy bottles. And to show you that even a collector like him, who's tasted, I mean, he will have wine that now, if were you to sell it, would be $10,000 a bottle.
Wow.
I mean, we're talking the world's most collectible wine. And you think that a collector like that would be able to tell a fake from not. But the first wine we opened, we were marveling that it actually tasted pretty good, but he knew it was a fake.
Yeah.
And it's great to be around people like that. It puts even me at ease. And I think you and I have a mission to put the casual drinker at ease, that like even we don't have all the answers and we can be duped. And, we're going to try our best. But the age of the monolithic, all-knowing wine critic is kind of past.
Yeah, I think so. And for better or worse, with so many voices out there, we were talking a little bit about this before we started, but there are so many blogs and so much on social media. And all of that is goodness in that, a lot more people are feeling the confidence to express their opinions. But it also means that being that one go-to, as you say, monolithic voice on high.
Right.
There's too much noise for that these days. And people
There
just
is.
go with what they trust, whether it's a friend who has a good palate or, someone they happen to identify with who makes them feel comfortable about wine, like as you do.
Exactly. And I feel lucky being able to taste some of these priceless wines, because what I'm buying are the $15 and the $20 wines, the equivalent. But you kind of see behind the curtain, and some of these wildly expensive wines, it's really fun to taste them. But you realize that you're not tasting them so much for the deliciousness, although some of them are mighty delicious, but it's more just wine. One of the great things about wine is it can just be there to mark amazing moments in life. That's how I justify overspending on certain wines, because in a way it's like a talisman or an elixir. It's a way for you and me, if we were around a table, to really mark a moment. But for those who think, like they'll say, well, you tasted a wine that's $1,000, or can you taste that? And I'll be like, no, you really can't. It's more just you're tasting something that's usually very, very rare, but it's not so much the inherent flavor of it. But a lot of casual drinkers don't realize that.
Yeah, well said.
He taught me a long time ago when I met him and I would drink some of his wine. He doesn't pontificate about wine. He doesn't go on and on, like you said, smelling, 12 things in it and talking about it and biasing people. He's taught me a lot. He kind of sits back and he watches people's reactions and he learns from them, but he doesn't impose his own tastes on other people. And so, well, I definitely get beetroot and tomato leaves in this. And it's funny, some of my friends here in New York who become like finance guys, like Wall Street types, they sometimes turn into that guy, the insufferable bore, like pontificating and blah, blah, blah. And then if they're lucky, I watch them come off of that pompous, Grey Poupon pedestal there. And then they're a little less tyrannical about wine. But, when people, what do they say? When you get a little bit of information, that's when you get really dangerous.
Yes.
But some of these, like, people like Randall Graham or Tim Hanai or you, there's a lot of people in the wine business who are like, they have nothing to prove. So they don't have to like talk in riddles, basically. I like that.
Oh, that's good. Good. Very good. Write that down for your next book.
Yeah.
I like the way you explain it, though, really, seriously. I mean, Mark Twain said something like, I was going to write you a short letter, but I didn't have time.
Exactly. Oh, I just got chills on the back of my neck. It's harder to write with brevity and concision.
Exactly.
People don't realize it. People will, like, as you rightly said, you use the word snackable about my book.
Yeah.
And like, even like people who don't know the horror it is to write will say, oh, well, you're not right. Like, it's so easy to read, or you're only writing a page on each subject. I'm like, yeah, but like I started, in my mind with like 8 pages, and you have to like think about, okay, what is absolutely necessary for people to know and take away everything else.
Kill your darlings. Hemingway condense, like it's harder. And, when I see reviews that say breezy or easy to read, snackable, those are the highest compliments. People think, oh, can't be that serious, or
Right.
that's an intellectual lightweight. Actually, that's taking the art form to the highest level. If you can reach people and get them to
Totally.
actually read it.
And you're locking yourself, at least I am, and I'm sure when you've written your books too, like you're locking yourself in a basement, like twice as long as you need to while writing it to make it breezy and make it snackable. I mean, like academics, like back to these law professors, they talk or they write in riddles because, you can just bang that out. I feel like when you have the audience in mind or the reader in mind, like when you empathize with the audience, that's when you're showing them the greatest respect. You're like, I'm going to make it so easy to read because I don't want to bore you. I want to keep your attention. I want to give you the, if you will, the filet mignon, the really good stuff and not the fat. But that, as you know, it takes time. It takes like, when I finished this book, I think I told someone, I spent 4 times the amount of time I needed to on this book. Like if I just wanted to bang it out, I would have taken a completely different approach. But it's hard to when you also view yourself as the consumer of information and you're a hard audience. So you're like, I'm not going to impose something I wouldn't want to read myself. I'm not going to impose that on someone else.
Absolutely. Woohoo. This is great. I love this. Before we wrap up our interview, is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to?
Well, one thing you had asked me before about one of my greatest wine moments.
Yes, please.
And I can tell you about it's more a story, but if
We
it's
like stories.
entertaining for your
We love stories.
audience. Okay, cool. It's actually an incredible story, and I have the transcript to prove it. I'll tantalize you with that.
Okay.
So I'm at a bachelor party dinner with a friend who works in banking and has too much money. And this was about 4 years ago. And we're sitting around the table, and these are like older wines, and these are kind of like these special bottles. And one had a gold and black label, and I thought it'd be really cool. And like when you take home an empty bottle, it's like a souvenir. In the wine world, it can be called a dead soldier. Like, it's like it's done its time, it's done its battle, and then it sits like a trophy on your shelf. So it's fun to take home a dead soldier souvenir empty bottle.
Sure.
So I take the bottle, and I don't normally, but I have a suit on, and there are 8 of us, and we get out into 10th Avenue. Restaurant no longer exists, but it was Tom Colicchio's restaurant, Colicchio and Sons. And it was Saturday night, New York, 11 p.m. And I get out into the 10th Avenue, and I hear, and I look over, and it's a squad car, a New York Police Department squad car. And of course, my friends, the good friends that they are, scatter like dust. And they have a spotlight on me. And again, if I'm making this, like I can't make this up because it's going to go to a place where there's a transcript. So they're over the side. So I go over the side, and they go, okay, what's in the bottle? And when wine is older, as you know, after about 10 years, some of the color pigments dissolve out as sediment, basically gook, clumpy stuff in the wine.
Yeah.
And you can't drink that little inch or 2 of the wine. So the cops are like, so what's in the bottle? I'm like, nothing. It's just a souvenir bottle I'm taking home. And they're like, let's see it. And I'm on foot. They're in their car, and they're told, well, it's not empty. There's something in it. And I'm like, well, those are colored pigment. Oh, forget it. So they write me up for a mandatory criminal court appearance, open container violation. Is it against the law where you are to carry alcohol?
I haven't tried it yet.
That's your homework for tonight.
Okay.
If you wind up in the slammer, I'll take care of Canada and come bail you out.
Excellent.
But basically, one of my friends came back, and they said to the police officer, he writes about wine. And the police were actually, the NYPD, they were pretty cool. And they knew they had made a mistake. And one gets out of the squad car, like, this is what you have to do. Just plead guilty. It's a $35 fine. You have to go down to the courthouse and just plead guilty. Everything, it won't go on your record. they gave me the bottle back, and I grabbed it, and I met up with the rest of the friends, and I kind of felt fun. Yeah, it just felt fun that night. Like I felt like I was a criminal. Like, look, I'm going to criminal court for this old 1970 Bordeaux. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to plead guilty. Not guilty. And for everyone who wants to take home a souvenir empty bottle of wine, I'm going to fight for their rights. I'm going to fight for my rights.
An avenger.
Avenger. So it takes about 4 months for this, when you plead not guilty, for it to wend its way through the court system. And I mean, this, I'm assuming you haven't been there, Natalie, but like, this is it's like night court, and it's full of people who've drunk driven and like reckless urinators. And it's like a funny crowd. And they assign a lawyer to you on the spot, like the public defender. And, so the judge, who's kind of white haired, Eddie Albert kind of type of big white bushy eyebrows, number 24464. So I go to the lectern, they assign the lawyer to me, and he goes, what do you do? And I go, well, I write about wine. And he kind of looks at me quizzically, and he was like, you what? And the attorney assigned to me goes, Your Honor, he says he writes about wine. And the guy looks at me, the judge looks quizzically again. He's like, well, let me get this straight. You go around all day, you drink wine, and then you write about it? And I'm like, yeah. And the judge is, I'm about to retire. Where do I get a job like that? And we were off and running. It turned into basically a de facto wine seminar in the courtroom. He wanted to know how much I had drunk in a day, like the most I had drunk, what makes wine ageable, and blah, 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 blah. He really it was fun. He must have been a Canadian at heart. And then eventually he goes, you know what? Case dismissed.
You stand for all of us, Mark.
Yes. I make it, for dead soldiers, for anyone who wants to take home these souvenir bottles. Now it's safe. And by the way, they got rid of that law in New York now. So now you don't have to go to criminal court. You still get a ticket, but it's not a mandatory criminal court appearance. So,
Your legacy has been made, my friend. Yeah. You don't need to do anything else.
Exactly. I can die now.
That's great. Not that we want that. That's awesome, Mark. Great story. I will just wrap up. So, Mark, thank you so much. And again, this is his latest book, How to Drink Like a Billionaire, Not Spend a Fortune. I've posted a link to where you can get that book. And he has 2 other books, fabulous stories, tips that you'll actually remember, and you won't fall asleep reading this book. You'll be entertained. You'll learn. You'll be smarter about wine. Thank you so much for spending all this time with us. I really appreciate it. Good luck. Are you working on a new book now, or what's your next big project?
Well, a bunch of media things in the pipeline. But as you know, there's a period after you write a book where like you're just exhausted and happy not to have that sword of Damocles over your head.
Sure.
So I'm enjoying not having a book to write right now.
Absolutely. Enjoying some wine and
indeed.
Thinking
and trying to stay out of the slammer when it comes
I know, Mark, please. You got a reputation to uphold here, but
exactly. But I want you to test it out up in Canada. And, if you get in trouble, you know who to call.
I'll say Mark. Yeah, Mark. And I can pay you in Moosehead beer, your fees.
I would love that. I still have a taste for it. It's funny when you develop tastes early.
Yeah.
You never lose a taste for it.
All right, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie.
We'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Cheers.
Okay,
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this chat with Mark Oldman. Here are my favorite tips that he shared. Number 1, when you're faced with the wine list and don't know what to choose, ask the server, which wine does the chef drink after work? Number 2, I love Mark's tip about smelling glasses for detergent or other impurities before the sommelier even pours the wine, and I've been using that to great satisfaction to intimidate servers everywhere I go. Just kidding. And number 3, billionaires are smart with their money. That's how they got rich in the first place. Mark has some great tips on how to drink like a billionaire without having a billionaire budget. If you like this episode, please tell a friend about it, especially one who's interested in those wine tips Mark shared. My podcast is easy to find, whether you search Google on its name, Unreserved Wine Talk, or on my name. You'll find links to Mark's website, books, social media handles, the bottle that sent him to criminal court, the video version of our conversation, and how you can join me on Facebook Live for some really great wine chats in real time and always with wine in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/60. Finally, if you want to learn why red wine shouldn't be your default pairing for many cheeses, join me in a free online video class at nataliemaclean.com/class. Next week, we'll chat about the power and problems with wine scores, whether single vineyard or blends are better, and the viral sensation of the manga wine series called Drops of God. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a wine that tastes like $1 billion, but doesn't cost that much. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So subscribe for free now at nataliemaclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.